Governor Abbott said last night on local TV in Texas, he said, I will call a special session after special session after special session until election of next year. All right, I don't know if that's the fate here, but how does this end, do you think, with lawmakers leaving the state?
Well, I think it's going to end with the Texas legislature taking up and passing election integrity legislation. What you're seeing the Democrats do here is a political stunt. And, you know, I will say it's ironic. As they were getting on their private jet to fly to Washington, D.C., they almost surely had to show identification to get on that jet. And yet they're doing this in a fit because they don't want mail-in ballots to be verified. They don't want the signatures to be verified. They don't want basic integrity steps to be strengthened in the state of Texas. This is, at the end of the day, politics, and they need to get back to doing their jobs. And one way or the other, they will. One of the things, you know, it's interesting, Bill, one of the very first assignments I ever had back 17 years ago, when I was newly appointed as the Solicitor General of Texas, one of the first questions I ever got is the Speaker of the House of the legislature. The legislature was redistricting then, and the Democrats did the same thing. They fled. That time they fled for Ardmore, Oklahoma, the House members, and then shortly thereafter for Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the Speaker of the House asked the Attorney General, who was then Greg Abbott, my boss, he said, hey, do I have the authority to arrest fleeing legislatures, these Democrats that have left to break a quorum? And Abbott, in turn, asked me. I did the research, and it turns out the answer is yes. Under the Texas Constitution, there's a provision that explicitly gives the Speaker the authority to arrest fleeing House members. That provision is copied word for word from the U.S. Constitution. And so this stunt is going to fail. They're going to come back. There's going to be a quorum, and I believe the legislature is going to do its job and protect the integrity of elections. Ensure people can vote, but also ensure that we don't have fraud, we don't have people casting illegal votes.
Yes, if there's one person who Republicans should trot out on air to discuss just how inappropriate it is for Texas Democrats to flee the state, it's Ted Cruz. I guess fleeing the state is only okay when you're bringing your family to the Ritz-Carlton while your own constituents are freezing to death. Ted Cruz is talking in response to Texas Democrats leaving the state to once again deprive the Republican-led legislature the quorum needed to pass their voter suppression bill.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Is there any way for those members who have left the Capitol and the state to participate in conducting the business of the special session on behalf of the people of Texas?
There is not, Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
If a quorum is not present, can those of us who have stayed in the Capitol to do the jobs we were elected to do take up bills on the floor?
That is not allowed under the rules, Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Can we at least hold committee hearings?
We may not, Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
When will the House have the chance to debate HB 3 or any of the other items the governor has submitted for our consideration?
Mr. Meyer, that is a hypothetical inquiry, but we may not conduct business until we have a quorum.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please start your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, can you clarify, are we able to take those issues up while Democrats are in Washington, D.C.?
We may not, Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please start your inquiry.
Is it true that the House rules were adopted by a unanimous vote?
I believe that's correct.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please start your inquiry.
Under those rules, can House committee chairs and vice chairs be removed from their positions?
They cannot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. The House will stand at ease.
Now, with Texas Democrats having left the state and depriving the legislature of quorum, House Republicans have ordered a call of the House, which authorizes Department of Public Safety troopers in Texas to arrest members of the state house who broke quorum. And to be clear, they'll come up empty-handed, considering these state legislators flew to Washington, D.C., and Texas's DPS troopers don't have jurisdiction outside of Texas. Now, as for Cruz's comments in this clip, he says this walkout will end with the Texas legislature passing election integrity legislation. Now, one note here, this is not election integrity legislation. That's just a tactic for Republicans to dress up voter suppression legislation. Calling it integrity legislation doesn't just suddenly make voter suppression legislation not voter suppression legislation. Beyond that, if Republicans actually needed to pass voter integrity legislation, that would suggest that there was some type of nefarious behavior that warranted it. And yet, At no point during this entire process, from the end of the 2020 election to now, that Republicans have been running around with their hair on fire crying fraud, did they actually prove any of it. Not once during the more than 60 court cases, not in the DOJ, not in the DHS, not through secretaries of state, not through recounts and audits did they prove fraud. Their entire case is predicated on a non-existent premise. You cannot fix something that is not broken. Also, notice how the only topic Ted Cruz focuses on with regard to Republicans' voter suppression bill is ID requirements, as if that's the only issue at hand here. In reality, ID requirements are the least of our worries. The Texas voter suppression bill includes banning 24-hour voting and ending drive-through voting, both of which were used in the state in the 2020 election. It imposes new restrictions and paperwork requirements on individuals who help disabled voters and non-English speakers cast a ballot. It makes it harder for election officials to remove partisan poll watchers sent by political campaigns or parties if those poll watchers intimidate or harass voters. It imposes a raft of new civil and criminal penalties on election officials and even individual volunteers who commit any minor violation of the state's new election law. None of those provisions should be passed by any legislature even mildly committed to voting rights. And of course, Republicans will point to the fact that they removed provisions that were included in previous versions of their bill, including a provision that would have shut down a number of polling precincts where predominantly black voters live, and a number that would have ended early voting on Sunday mornings, where black churches sponsor Souls to the Polls drives. And they'll point to those as a sign of compromise. But so that we're clear, it's not a compromise to just take out the single most blatantly racist provisions of a bill. It should be the bare minimum to take out those provisions. It's like someone breaking into your house and saying, "I'm gonna murder you," and then set your house on fire, and then saying, "Look, I'll tell you what, I'll compromise. I'll just set your house on fire and I won't murder you." Removing one horrific provision doesn't de facto make the other thing okay. So look, Republicans like Ted Cruz will focus on this move by the Democrats as if it's happening in a vacuum and wail about how the Democrats should be arrested for avoiding their duties. But all this is the result of Republicans' anti-democratic actions. That is the subversion of democracy here. Let's not get it twisted. If anyone has the grounds to complain about any, quote, stunt, it's the stunt pulled by Texas Republicans to shut voters out of the democratic process because they might dare to commit the cardinal sin of voting for a Democrat. So good on these Texas Democrats for standing up for democracy, and doing so from the minority. And more importantly, this should serve as a wake-up call, a 5-alarm fire for national Democrats who are in the majority to pass the For the People Act and to pass it now, even if that means eliminating or reforming the precious filibuster. Because if these legislators have to leave their families, their homes, their other jobs, and their entire state just to stave off Republican efforts at voter suppression, then the least these national Democrats could do is wake up and do what they have the power to do and pass national legislation to protect our most fundamental right as Americans. As a side note, there's an ActBlue in the post description of this video to raise money for the Texas House Democratic Campaign Committee, so they have all the resources they need to sustain this walkout as long as it takes for the For the People Act to get passed, considering Texas Governor Greg Abbott can call unlimited special legislative sessions. This fight won't be easy, and it requires participation not just from these Texas Democrats. So if you support what they're doing, then please do your part while they do theirs. If you enjoyed that video and you're looking for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. It's a no BS look at the top stories of the week, along with interviews with the top names in politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, and more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Also, if you want to see more videos like this one, click the subscribe link right here on this screen to join the more than 1 million people who've already subscribed to my channel. And finally, to donate to my Don't Be a Mitch fund, where I'm raising money for a whole raft of different voter outreach and voter registration groups in the closest states ahead of midterms in 2022, including Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Texas. You can find that link on this screen as well. Thanks for watching.